My name is Daphne Morell. I'm 35 years old, and the day my mother left my son crying at my front door was the day I finally understood that some gifts are not meant to surprise you. They are meant to warn you. I was in the kitchen when I heard three small knocks, not strong enough to be an adult, not calm enough to be normal. When I opened the door, my son was standing on the porch with his face wet, his shoulders shaking, and a wrapped box pressed against his chest like he was afraid it might fall and explode. My mother's car was already turning the corner. She had not waited to see if I opened the door. She had not called. She had not even walked him inside. I pulled him into the house and asked if he was hurt, but he only shook his head and held the box toward me with both hands. Then he whispered, "She said to tell you not to make a scene." Something in my chest went cold. The box was wrapped too perfectly. Dark paper, white ribbon, the kind of careful wrapping that made it feel even more wrong. I sat my son on the couch, checked his arms, his face, his hands, and told him he was safe. But he kept staring at that box like it had followed him home. When I opened it, I saw enough to know this was not a family argument anymore. There were pieces of something my son loved, a note with my name on it, photos that should not have existed, and one small item hidden inside that made my hands start shaking. I reached for my phone and called the police before I called anyone else. By the time my husband walked through the door, two officers were standing in our living room. My son was wrapped in a blanket, and the open box was sitting on the table between us. My husband looked at the officers, then at me, and his face went pale. Police? What happened? Before I tell you what was inside that box and why my mother thought she could scare me into silence, tell me where you are listening from and what the weather feels like today. Is it peaceful outside? Or does it feel like a storm is waiting too? Stay with me until the end, because this is the story of the day I stopped protecting the image of a family that was willing to use my child to control me. To understand why I did not treat that box like a dramatic misunderstanding, you need to understand the kind of family I came from. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, in a house that looked warm from the sidewalk and felt cold once the front door closed. My mother, Maribel Voss, was the kind of woman everyone in town thought they knew. She owned a small event planning business, arranged church banquets, charity lunches, baby showers, and weddings, and people called her graceful and generous. What they did not see was that at home, she used that same gift to arrange people too. She knew where to place guilt, when to dim someone's joy, and how to wrap control in words soft enough that outsiders would mistake it for concern. My stepfather, Russell Voss, was a real estate broker with a polished voice, expensive shoes, and a reputation for knowing everyone who mattered. He did not slam doors or shout in public. He did not need to. Russell could destroy your confidence with one calm sentence, then smile at dinner like he had only offered advice. When I was a child, love in our house always came with conditions. If I made my mother proud, she introduced me as her brilliant daughter. If I disagreed, she said I was embarrassing the family. If I cried, Russell told me emotions were useful only when they helped you win. I learned early that peace meant obedience. That is probably why I became a crisis coordinator at a child advocacy center. Every day, I worked with children who had learned to make themselves small around adults who were supposed to protect them. I knew what fear looked like when it had no bruise. So when my own son came home trembling with that box, I did not need anyone to tell me something was wrong. I knew. When I married Jonah Morell, my mother called it a practical mistake with emotional packaging. Jonah was not from one of the old Savannah families. He was not a lawyer, a doctor, or a man Russell could brag about at the country club. He was a solar energy technician who had worked his way up through long shifts, night classes, and stubborn decency. He fixed things without making a performance out of it. He loved me in a way that did not feel like a test. That alone made my mother suspicious. After our son Theo was born, Maribel's disappointment shifted into something sharper. She criticized his school, his clothes, his lunchbox, his bedtime, the way Jonah let him build model ships on the kitchen table, and the way I encouraged him to ask questions instead of forcing obedience. Russell liked to say, boys needed backbone, but what he meant was that boys needed to respect authority before they learned to trust themselves. By the time Theo turned 8, I had reduced contact with them to birthdays, holidays, and short visits I could supervise. They were not allowed to pick him up from school, discipline him, or take him anywhere without telling me exactly where they were going. Maribel acted wounded every time I repeated those boundaries, but she followed them because she still cared about looking like a loving grandmother. Then Jonah received an offer in Burlington, Vermont. It was a project management role with better hours, better pay, and a chance for Theo to grow up without my parents turning every family choice into a public trial. When we told them, I expected guilt. I expected my mother to wipe her eyes and say I was abandoning her. I did not expect Russell to lean back, stare at Jonah, and say, "You are not taking that boy across the country because you got lucky with one job offer." Theo froze beside me. Maribel reached for his hand like she was comforting him, but her eyes stayed on me. Then she said, "Daphne, a child belongs close to the people who made his family possible." That was when I realized they were not grieving distance. They were losing access. And people like that do not let go without trying to make someone pay. For 3 days after that dinner, my phone stayed quiet. And somehow the silence felt more dangerous than the argument. Maribel had always believed that a good apology was not about regret. It was about timing. So when her first text came, I read it twice before answering. She sent a picture of Theo at 4 years old, sitting on her porch steps with melted popsicle on his chin, and wrote, "I do not want him to remember us with sadness." Then came another message, then another. She missed him. She loved him. She was proud of the boy he was becoming. Russell left Jonah a voicemail saying he may have spoken too strongly and that men sometimes reacted poorly when family was changing. The words sounded reasonable, but I had known Russell too long to confuse strategy with humility. Still, Theo was 8, and children do not carry adult history the same way. He remembered birthday cakes, toy sailboats, and Christmas mornings when everyone performed happiness so well that even I almost believed it. When Maribel asked for one farewell brunch, I said no at first. She did not argue. She only said she understood, waited a day, then sent a voice message. Her voice trembled just enough. She said she knew she had not always respected my choices, but she could not bear for Theo to leave Savannah thinking his grandmother had not wanted to say goodbye. Theo heard part of it from the hallway, and that night he asked if he could see them one more time. He had been building a small wooden ship with Jonah, a simple model with a blue hull and a white paper sail, and he wanted to give it to them before we moved. On the sail he had written, "New home, same family." I looked at those words and felt something pull inside me. Children can be so generous to people who have not earned it. I called my best friend, Kira Nolan, before I answered my mother. Kira worked as a counselor at the same child advocacy center where I handled crisis intake, and she had the kind of steady voice that could make panic sit down for a minute. I told her everything. Kira did not tell me I was wrong for considering it. She only said, "Put the boundaries in writing, and do not make them emotional. Make them clear." So I did. I texted Maribel that Theo could come for brunch for 90 minutes only. She would pick him up and bring him back to our front door. He would keep his phone in his pocket. No surprise stops. No other adults. No talk about custody, courts, moving, or whether Theo wanted to stay in Savannah. No criticizing me or Jonah. No asking Theo to keep secrets. If he wanted to come home early, she would bring him home immediately. I expected pushback. Instead, she replied, "Of course, honey. Whatever makes you comfortable." Russell replied 10 minutes later with, "We just want one peaceful goodbye." Jonah read both messages and said, "I hate how easy they are making this sound." I hated it too. But Theo spent the night carefully wrapping the little ship in tissue paper, excited and nervous, asking if Grandma might cry when she saw it. I told him adults were responsible for their own feelings. The next morning, Maribel arrived at exactly 10. She wore a cream sweater, pearl earrings, and the soft expression she used when neighbors might be watching. Russell sat in the passenger seat and did not get out. Theo hugged me twice before leaving. I checked that his phone was in his pocket. Maribel promised that she would have him home before noon. As the car pulled away, Theo turned and waved from the back seat with the little shipbox on his lap. I waved back, but my stomach felt heavy. Jonah had gone to check on equipment for his final week at work, so I was alone when I returned to the kitchen. I packed mugs, taped pantry boxes, answered 2 emails, and checked my phone every few minutes. At 10:30, Maribel sent one photo of Theo at their dining room table. He was smiling, but the smile looked stiff. I texted, "Please remind him he can call me anytime." She responded, "He is fine." At 10:47, I called Theo. It went to voicemail. At 10:52, I was reaching for my keys when I heard the knock at the door. Small, fast, frightened. And when I opened it, my son was standing there alone. Theo did not step inside until I reached for him. That was the first thing that scared me. My son had never been afraid to come into his own home. He stood on the porch with his cheeks wet and his lips pressed together, holding a wrapped box against his chest with both hands. One sneaker was untied. His jacket was zipped wrong, caught halfway over his shirt. Behind him, Maribel's car was already turning out of our street. She had not walked him to the door. She had not waited for me. She had not even checked whether I was home before leaving him there. I pulled Theo inside and locked the door. He flinched at the sound of the deadbolt. I wanted to run after her car. I wanted to call her and scream until every neighbor came outside. But Theo was watching me, and I understood something every parent should understand. When a child has been frightened, your reaction becomes part of their safety. So I lowered my voice. I knelt in front of him and asked if anyone had hit him. He shook his head. I asked if anyone had touched him in a way that made him uncomfortable. He shook his head again. I asked if he was hurt anywhere. He whispered, "No, but Grandma said you would be mad." I told him there was nothing he could say that would make me mad at him. His eyes went to the box. It was wrapped in dark blue paper with a white ribbon tied too tightly. My mother had always been good at wrapping ugly things beautifully. I set it on the coffee table, guided Theo to the couch, and wrapped a blanket around him. I told him we did not have to talk until he was ready. He stared at his hands for a long time. Then he said, "Brunch was normal at first. Grandma made waffles. Russell asked about school. They gave him orange juice in the glass with the little fish on it, the one he liked when he was smaller. Theo said he gave them the ship after they ate. He had been proud of it." Maribel started crying as soon as she saw the words. At first, Theo thought they were happy tears. Then Russell picked up the ship and asked, "So you are excited to leave us behind?" Theo told him he was not leaving anyone behind. He was just moving with his parents. Russell said children did not always know when their parents were making selfish choices. Maribel told Theo that I had always been difficult, that I had never understood family loyalty, and that Jonah was filling my head with ideas because he wanted to isolate us. Theo said he tried to change the subject. He asked if they wanted to see the map he had drawn of our drive to Vermont. That was when Russell took the paper and looked at it like it had insulted him. He asked why Theo had marked new house with a star, but had not marked Grandma's house as home. Theo said because Grandma's house was not where he lived. Russell snapped the little paper sail off the ship. Theo said the sound was tiny, but it felt loud. Maribel told him not to cry because boys who cried made adults think they were being mistreated. Then she opened a drawer and took out photographs. Theo's voice got smaller when he told me about them. One photo showed him outside the school gate. Another showed him walking into piano class. Another showed him sitting in Jonah's truck outside the grocery store, eating fries from a paper bag. None of those photos had been taken by me. None had been sent to my mother. Theo said Russell tapped one picture and told him, "We always know where you are, buddy. That is what family does." Maribel said, "Your mother thinks distance will make her powerful, but she forgets we have eyes too." Theo started crying then. He said he asked to call me, but Maribel told him he was being dramatic and that I would only make a scene. Russell left the room and came back with the wrapped box. The broken ship was gone from the table. Theo asked where it was. Russell placed the box in his hands and said, "Give this to your mother. Tell her this is the last chance to remember where she belongs." Maribel helped Theo put on his jacket, but she did it so quickly the zipper caught wrong. In the car, Theo cried the whole way home. My mother did not comfort him. She only said, "Tell your mom not to make a scene." Then, right before she let him out at the curb, she leaned back and said, "If she gets scared enough, maybe she will finally listen." Theo looked at me after saying that and whispered, "Am I in trouble because I told you?" I held his face in my hands and said, "No, sweetheart. You are safe because you told me." Adults should never make children carry fear for them. Then his eyes moved back to the box and he said, "I think there is something bad inside." I moved the box from the coffee table to the kitchen counter because I did not want Theo sitting near it. Then I texted Kira with one shaking hand. "Come now. Something happened with my mother." I did not call Maribel. I did not call Russell. Some part of the old me wanted answers, but the mother in me knew answers could wait. Evidence could not. At work, I had helped families through enough emergencies to know that people who cross boundaries often count on panic to erase the trail. So before I untied the ribbon, I took photos. The box from the front, the box from the side, the knot. The way Theo's fingerprints had pressed into the paper because he had held it so tightly. Then I told Theo to stay on the couch, put on his headphones, and watch the animal documentary he loved. He asked if the police were coming. I had not said the word police yet, but children feel truth before adults speak it. I told him I did not know yet, but my job was to keep him safe. The ribbon came loose too easily. The paper underneath was smooth and expensive. Inside was a white cardboard box with my name written on the lid in Maribel's elegant handwriting. Daphne. Nothing else. The first thing I saw was the wooden ship, or what was left of it. The blue hull had been cracked down the middle. The sail was torn in half. The words, "New home, same family" were still visible, but someone had drawn a thick black line through "same family." I covered my mouth before Theo could hear the sound I made. Under the ship was his small green notebook, the one he had left at Maribel's house 2 months earlier. He had used it for little maps, treasure routes, imaginary islands, and names of places he wanted to visit someday. I opened it and felt my stomach turn. Several pages had been filled with handwriting that was not his. The sentences were written like a child might say them, but the words were wrong. Mom makes me leave people I love. Dad says Grandma is bad. I feel scared when Mom gets angry. There were dates beside some of the sentences, as if someone had been trying to create a record, a fake record. Beneath the notebook were 3 photographs: Theo at school, Theo outside piano class, Theo with Jonah in the parking lot. The angles made my skin go cold. Whoever took them had not been standing openly, they had been watching from a distance. At the bottom of the box was a small black device no bigger than a lighter, taped inside the broken hull of the ship, and beside it was a USB drive with a white label that said, "For the judge." The last thing in the box was a folded letter. I unfolded it by the corner. It said, "Daphne, Do not overreact. Theo deserves stability, not a mother who runs whenever she cannot handle accountability. We have enough to prove that you and Jonah are making reckless choices. If you force this move, people will learn what happens in your home when no one is watching. Think carefully before you destroy this family. I read it twice because my mind refused to accept that my mother had wrapped those words and placed them in my child's hands. Kira arrived while I was still standing there. She saw the box, saw my face, and closed the door behind her. I pointed to the counter and said, "They made him carry this home." Kira did not touch anything. She looked at the photos, the notebook, the USB, the device, then said, "Call the police." Not them. Not Jonah first. Police. I called 911 because there were pictures of my child taken in places my parents were not allowed to be, a possible recording device, a threat about court, and a terrified 8-year-old in my living room. Saying it out loud made me feel like the story belonged to someone else. The dispatcher kept her voice calm. She asked whether my parents were still nearby. I said I did not know. That scared me more than saying yes. While we waited, Kira sat with Theo and helped him breathe. When Officer Malik Brenner arrived with Officer Denise Arlo, I expected at least one moment of doubt, the kind people sometimes show when family harm does not look like a broken window or a bleeding lip. But Officer Brenner's expression changed the second he saw the photographs. He asked if Maribel or Russell had permission to be at Theo's school, piano studio, or near our home. I said no. Officer Arlo asked if she could speak with Theo while I sat beside him. She did not tower over him. She sat on the floor near the couch and asked gentle questions that did not push him faster than he could go. Theo told her about the ship, the pictures, the car ride, and the warning. When he repeated Maribel's sentence about scaring me enough to listen, Officer Brenner wrote it down slowly. They did not plug in the USB. They did not turn on the device. Officer Brenner said both would need to be handled carefully and documented. Then I heard Jonah's truck pulling into the driveway. I had sent him only 3 words after calling 911. "Come home now." He stepped inside wearing his work jacket, with his phone still in his hand. He saw 2 officers, Kira beside Theo, and the open box on the kitchen counter. His face went pale before I said a single word. He looked at Officer Brenner, then at me, and asked, "Police? What happened?" But the fear in his eyes told me something else. He was connecting it to something I did not know yet. Jonah walked toward Theo first. Even with police in the house, even with my face probably telling him the world had shifted, he went to our son before he asked for an explanation. Theo reached for him and broke down all over again. Jonah knelt, held him, and whispered that he was home. He was safe, and nobody was taking him anywhere. Officer Brenner waited until Theo was with Kira in the den before he asked Jonah if he knew anything that might explain the threat in the box. Jonah looked at me, and guilt crossed his face. He said Russell came to my job this morning. The room went quiet. Jonah told us Russell had been waiting near the employee entrance at the solar facility around 8:15. He had not yelled. Russell was too careful for that. He asked Jonah to walk with him, then told him that moving Theo to Vermont would create questions. He said men with stressful histories should be careful about dragging children into unstable situations. My chest tightened because I knew exactly what history he meant. 4 years earlier, Jonah had been injured during a worksite accident when a support beam dropped too soon and crushed part of his leg. His body healed, but for months afterward he struggled with panic attacks around loud machinery and closed spaces. He got help. He went to therapy. He did everything people are supposed to do when life breaks something inside them. It was private and long behind him. Maribel knew because I had once told her in confidence when I still believed my mother could hold my pain without turning it into a tool. Jonah said Russell mentioned details he should not have known. The name of the clinic where Jonah had gone for counseling. The month he returned to work. A sentence Jonah had said to me in our bedroom during one of his worst nights, that he sometimes worried he was failing as a husband because I had to be strong for both of us. That sentence had never been written anywhere. It had never been said in front of Maribel. Officer Brenner looked toward the box where the black device sat beside the USB. Jonah continued. Russell told him that courts respected stability, and if we insisted on moving, the right people might need to look into whether Theo was safe with a mother who worked around trauma all day and a father with a history of anxiety. Jonah said he wanted to tell me in person, but he did not want to scare me over the phone while Theo was still with my mother. He thought Russell was bluffing. Then he saw the police, and knew he was not. Before I could answer, someone knocked on the front door. 3 hard hits, confident and angry. Officer Brenner motioned for everyone to stay where they were. I looked through the side window and saw Russell on the porch with Maribel behind him. Maribel's face was already wet. Not from guilt, I knew, but from preparation. Officer Brenner opened the door halfway and stepped outside first. Russell tried to look past him. He said, "This is a family matter." Officer Brenner said there was an active report involving a child and possible harassment, and they needed to remain outside unless invited in. Russell smiled like a younger man had failed to recognize his importance. He said, "I know how these things work, officer. My wife and I are respected in this community." Officer Brenner did not move. Maribel started crying harder and called my name. She said she never meant for Theo to be frightened. She said he was sensitive, that he misunderstood adult conversation, that I had trained him to fear them. I stepped into the doorway behind Officer Brenner and said, "You dropped him at the curb sobbing with a box full of threats." Maribel put her hand to her chest. She said, "Threats? Daphne, no. It was a message." Russell cut in and said they were concerned grandparents. He said the photos proved they were attentive, not dangerous. He said the device was harmless, just something to make sure Theo was safe if we took him somewhere unfamiliar. Officer Brenner asked why a harmless safety device had been hidden inside a broken toy and sent home with a letter about court. Russell's jaw tightened. He said, "Because she refuses to listen unless she is forced to face reality." Then Officer Brenner asked Maribel whether she had told Theo to tell me not to make a scene. Maribel looked at Russell before answering. She said, "I may have said something like that because Daphne always escalates. I asked her if she showed my son photographs taken without my permission. She said, 'We only wanted him to understand that family does not disappear just because you move.'" I asked if she made him carry a box that scared him. Her voice rose and the tears stopped. "We only scared him because you would not listen to us." Kira closed her eyes. Jonah said my name softly, but I did not need to say anything. Officer Brenner had heard her. Officer Arlo had heard her. Both officers wrote it down. Russell turned on Maribel and told her to stop talking. For 1 second, I saw the old pattern from my childhood standing on my porch. He commanded. She folded. I used to fold too. Not anymore. Officer Brenner told them to leave the property and warned them that any further contact could worsen the situation. Russell tried to argue. He said he had rights as a grandfather. Officer Brenner said, "Not to frighten a child, sir." After they left, the house felt too quiet. Theo came out of the den and asked if Grandma was mad. Jonah lifted him into his arms and said, "Grandma's feelings are not your job." That night we changed the locks even though Maribel and Russell did not have keys. I removed them from every school form, medical contact, pickup list, and emergency file. Kira helped me save screenshots, voicemails, call logs, and the messages where Maribel had agreed to every brunch rule she broke. The next morning, Officer Brenner sent the report number, and Kira connected us with Adrian Holt, a family attorney who had handled protective orders involving extended relatives before. We filed for emergency protection. I hated writing down what Theo had said. I hated that my child's fear had to become paperwork. But Adrian said something I held on to. Documentation is not cruelty. It is how truth survives denial. 2 days later, my aunt, Celeste Voss, called and said Maribel had been telling relatives that I had lost control, that Jonah was isolating me, that Theo had been coached to lie. I agreed to one family meeting at Celeste's house, not to make peace, but to speak the truth one time with witnesses. Russell arrived wearing a navy blazer like he was attending a business lunch. Maribel arrived pale and trembling, but she still looked at me like she expected comfort. I did not give it. Russell started with a speech about family, loyalty, and the cruelty of keeping grandparents away from a child. I let him talk. Then Jonah played the doorbell recording from our front porch, showing Theo standing alone with the box while Maribel's car drove away. Kira placed printed photos of the broken ship, the notebook pages, the surveillance photos, and the police report number on the table. Adrian calmly explained that the USB and device were now part of the evidence being reviewed. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Celeste looked at Maribel and asked, "Did you really make that little boy carry this?" Maribel started crying again, but this time no one moved to comfort her. Russell slammed his hand on the table and said, "He is my grandson." I stood up. My voice shook, but it did not break. "No, he is my child. And you do not get to frighten him and call it love." That was the moment their power in the family broke. Not because they admitted everything. People like that rarely do. It broke because everyone finally saw what I had survived behind closed doors. The temporary protective order was granted first, then extended after the court reviewed the report, the messages, the doorbell footage, the photographs, Jonah's statement about the workplace threat, and Theo's account of the brunch. Maribel and Russell were not allowed to contact Theo, come to our home, approach his school, attend his activities, send gifts through relatives, or ask other people to pass along messages. The order felt like a piece of paper, but to me it was the first official document in my life that said their version of love was not above my child's safety. Theo's school received their photos. His piano teacher received their names. The office staff knew not to release information to them. For the first time, the walls around my son were not made of my anxiety alone. They were made of rules other adults agreed to enforce. The USB was later reviewed through the proper channels, and what it contained made everything uglier. There were audio clips from visits at Maribel's house, pieces of conversations edited to make me sound angry, and Jonah sound unstable. There were notes about Theo's schedule, screenshots from social media posts by other parents, and a file labeled custody concerns. Russell had been building a story, not because Theo was unsafe with us, but because control needs a costume before it can walk into court. The plan failed because they got impatient. They wanted to scare me quickly, and in doing so, they handed me the proof of what they were willing to do. The consequences came faster than I expected. Russell lost a major referral partnership after word spread that he had been accused of following a child and hiding a device in a toy. He tried to call it gossip, but people who once trusted his polished voice now heard something else underneath it. Maribel stepped down from the church charity committee after several mothers said they were uncomfortable with her helping plan children's events. She told people she was being persecuted by an ungrateful daughter. Maybe some believed her. I stopped caring. For years, I had protected her image because I thought exposing her would make me cruel. What I finally understood was that protecting a false image can leave real people unprotected. We moved to Burlington 3 weeks later. The move was not magical. Safety does not erase fear overnight. Theo jumped when the doorbell rang. He stopped building model ships for a while. He asked if Grandma and Russell could find us through maps. He asked if he had ruined the family by telling the truth. Every time, Jonah and I gave him the same answer in different ways. You did not ruin anything. You told the truth. Adults are responsible for adult choices. We found a child therapist who helped him name what had happened without making him feel responsible for it. Slowly, he came back to himself. Jonah bought a small workbench for Theo's room, but he did not pressure him to build another ship. He only left the pieces there and said, "Whenever you feel like it." One rainy Saturday in Vermont, I found Theo sitting at that bench with glue on his fingers and sunlight coming through the window. He had built a new ship, smaller than the first, but stronger. The sail was white, and across it he had written, "Safe people only." I stood in the doorway and cried quietly, not because my son was broken, but because he was healing in a way that told the truth. That is the lesson Maribel and Russell never understood. Family is not a title that gives someone permission to control, threaten, follow, or frighten a child. Love should never make a child carry secrets. Love should never ask a child to choose between safety and loyalty. Real love respects boundaries, and real parenting means choosing your child's peace over your fear of being judged. What happened to us taught me that education is not only what children learn from books or classrooms, it is also the valuable knowledge they learn by watching adults protect the vulnerable, tell the truth, and refuse to normalize harm just because it comes from family. Theo learned that his voice mattered. Jonah learned that silence, even when meant to prevent panic, can leave danger in the dark too long. And I learned that setting boundaries does not destroy healthy families. It only reveals the relationships that were depending on your silence to survive. My mother left my son crying at my door with a strange gift because she thought fear would make me obey. Instead, that box became the last thing she ever used to control my home. And if you are listening while wondering whether protecting your peace makes you ungrateful, remember this. The people who truly love you will not need your silence to feel powerful. They will want you and your children to feel safe enough to speak.
We hope this story was worth your time and left behind something meaningful. Everything in this video is fictional and created only for entertainment and education. Remember that you're allowed to outgrow people, places, and relationships that only knew how to hurt the old version of you, especially when your healing requires distance.